Department of Justice last week released two detailed and fascinating and disturbing reports about the incidents in Ferguson, Missouri last August when Michael Brown was shot by a white police officer, killed, and the community erupted in protests that spread around the country essentially twice, once after the events and then once after a grand jury in St. Louis County declined to indict. The Justice Department report on the Michael Brown death makes it clear why there was no indictment, but the accompanying report on Ferguson, Missouri makes it clear why there was so much suspicion and distrust in that community, documenting a pattern and practice of civil rights, constitutional rights violations of the police department regarding the black community there. This is the Opinion Show. I'm Elizabeth Sullivan. I direct the editorial board for the Plain Dealer and the Northeast Ohio Media Group, and I'm joined by other members of the editorial board, Kevin O'Brien, who is the deputy editorial page editor for the Plain Dealer and a noted columnist, and editorial writers Pete Krause, Chris Evans, and Sharon Broussard. We're going to be talking about both of these reports today, and we hope that you will join in with your comments when this is posted. Sharon, I wonder if you could give us a kind of a brief rundown on what you think were the biggest takeaways from the two reports.
Okay. The biggest takeaway in the report on Michael Brown and his encounter with police officer Darren Wilson was that according to credible witnesses, and the report outlines every single witness there was and what the person had to say and whether or not they felt they were credible, and their measure was consistent with DNA and forensic evidence and the autopsy report. And then goes through them one by one, showing that, basically there was a struggle inside of the car started by Michael Brown. He was shot in the thumb. He turned around, and several credible witnesses saw him turn around and charge. Excuse me. And so, I encourage people to read the report, people who have their doubts, but I thought that Eric Holder and his staff went back and they re-interviewed witnesses and came to a conclusion that I think is supported by the evidence that's, in the report.
That's one of the things that struck me, was that there was a confluence of the forensic and physical hard evidence and DNA evidence with the witness accounts as they reconstructed them. So I thought it was a very persuasive study. Kevin, you wrote about that report specifically. What do you think was the biggest issue there?
Well, I think how hard the Justice Department worked to find anybody who could implicate the officer. They canvassed 300 people who may or may not have seen a thing. They went all around the neighborhood, they talked to everybody. They did uncover a couple of people in that canvas who hadn't come forward before because they didn't want to risk community backlash. So to me, the thing that stood out was how there was this serious division between the police and the people that they're charged to protect, and a deep distrust, the consideration that the police are an occupying army in the neighborhood rather than a force for safety, and that's kind of a scary thing.
Yeah, but I think that's something you would find in many different communities,
I agree.
Which is why that story about, that was not substantiated, that he had his hands up,
right,
that he yelled, "Don't shoot," people did not hear him. I thought it was good that they canvassed so many people, because then you got, people who they could then say witness 101, for example, who was a friend walking down the street with him, most likely didn't see a thing. No, he was on TV saying he saw a lot of things because he ran away, according to many witnesses, and was out hiding somewhere. And you needed to then, see, did you have the evidence to discredit people who have taken on a kind of, maybe heroic status in the community by people saying like, oh yeah, he saw everything and he knows everything, and when actually he did not. So I thought that was important to do.
It has taken more than 6 months, however, for this authoritative account to emerge, which is troubling in and of itself, that essentially the authorities in St. Louis County and in Ferguson, Missouri could not themselves do a credible investigation. And the second report, reveals why.
Well, it turns out they did a credible investigation. They chose not to indict on very solid reasons. So, all of that stuff was out there. They had done the same kind of work. The Justice Department went back and repeated a lot of the things and then expanded the investigation some. But I don't think that was necessarily in an effort to find justice. I think it was an effort to find a way to charge this guy with a civil rights violation.
Although we were critical of the lack of transparency and information that was provided by authorities, both immediately after the killing and also with regard to the grand jury process.
But wasn't, I may be mistaken, but when the prosecutor came out and announced that they were not going to indict, didn't he pretty much lay out all the evidence that they had? In fact, he was criticized for doing that. People were saying, well, that's not what the prosecutor's supposed to do. He's supposed to look at the evidence, and if there's a reasonable chance that this could have happened, they're supposed to indict. Instead, he kind of tried the case, but I think he did that for a purpose because he knew how volatile it was, and I think you can go back now, and that prosecutor is somewhat vindicated in what he did.
Yeah, but I think that it was such a toxic atmosphere that you actually needed to have a third party, independent, eyes and ears on the ground, interviewing people and trying to find out, does this story really hold up?
Well, it was a toxic atmosphere because there was a narrative that was being pushed so hard by people who didn't know what they were talking about but wanted a certain outcome that you couldn't get past a toxic atmosphere.
But I think
The authorities did what they were supposed to do and came up with the right result twice.
Right, but I think that's the importance of the second DOJ report, where you understand the context that this was happening in, where you have a police force that is exploiting the black community.
Yeah, maybe.
And so I think that really helped explain, the reaction in Ferguson on why people had.
That's the excuse that's out there now for doing the second report.
But when you
Sharon, why don't you talk just briefly about that issue of the exploitation, because that, to me, was really pretty shocking in the Department of Justice report on Ferguson.
Yeah, I thought it was pretty shocking in terms of the fact that they were basically telling the police department, and not every single officer felt that this is the way it should be handled. They want to do more, many want to do more public safety duties, but instead they would get, emails from the city manager, go to the commander like, oh, well, can you increase income by a certain amount this month because we see a budget gap? And they went out there and they were writing tickets, and then they were, for one stop you might get several different tickets, and then fines when you couldn't pay because some people could not pay, and there was very little community service option. So then you basically had people on a treadmill where their original fine or ticket might not have been that much, but with all the fines and fees and stuff, then it was getting higher and higher. And on the other hand, you had the municipal court judge and police commanders and people like that asking, could they have their tickets and fines waived for themselves and their friends and their relatives, while they're telling folks like, oh, these people don't have any personal responsibility, but neither did they. So
Right. And then at the same time, you have the racist emails that are going around the police department.
right, as well.
Well, they cited 9. I mean, those,
They were good ones.
They were troubling, but nonetheless, it's like many things, shocking as they were, it's not everybody who was signing on to them or probably had those attitudes. But nonetheless, there was this sort of diseased, organism, which is now being
handled by the Missouri Supreme Court. That Judge Brockmeyer has resigned. They put in an appeals court judge, and he's going to hear the Ferguson cases. But more importantly, he's been given the authority to overhaul the court practices. We had two Ferguson police commanders resigned over the email situation, and a county clerk as well. I understand the city manager resigned yesterday at some time.
Yep.
So,
Yep.
There's a lot of cleaning house going on.
right. Now,
So Ferguson may end up looking a little bit less like 90% of the cities in the United States, which all do the same thing.
Right.
Yeah, I know, but that doesn't mean
I mean,
that-
look at Cleveland. We just got rid of traffic cameras, which were nothing but a cash cow. It's the same thing. All the Justice Department did was overlay that with some racial component. Well, it's going to be really hard to avoid offending black people if you're a policeman in a department that serves a city that's 75 or 80% black. Most of the people you deal with are going to be black.
Yeah, but I know
the Justice Department's findings also included constitutional violations in terms of excessive force, use of excessive force, and differential treatment of black
And if
suspects.
you don't look into that, you will find it anywhere.
Especially in a community where you have, and I think there's fairly high unemployment there, low wage, a lot of, it's an area that's struggling. which is kind of the root of everything. When people don't have jobs and they're not making money and they're living in situations and conditions that they don't like.
Right, but that
Yeah,
doesn't,
but the point that
the
it's
governor appointed a commission, and isn't that one of its charges to
Yeah, the
to
Ferguson
look at the
Commission.
jobs picture
and the whole
in
economic.
that region, and to make jobs more accessible to people who live either in the inner city or these inner ring suburbs and can't get to the jobs.
Yeah, and the fact that it's everywhere doesn't mean that it
That's
should
all
be
right.
anywhere.
Right.
I mean, really the idea of the American dream is that everybody is treated fairly and
Equally.
respectfully.
I agree, but you've got the Justice Department singling out this city basically to throw a bone to the grievance lobby, and that's
Oh,
all
no,
we've
I
got.
don't single it out
I know you don't think so,
after
but
the
I'm just telling
shooting.
you.
I mean, that's why.
But don't you think that Ferguson will be a more wholesome place if the police improve their relations with the community, if these corrupt practices are eliminated, if a decent consent decree is negotiated and signed that allows for long-term change, and if people's economic circumstances improve, won't that be beneficial?
In a word, no, because none of that is going to happen. What's going to happen is the Justice Department is going to say, look, cops, you got to back off, and Ferguson will become among the more lawless places that you'll ever want to see, and nobody will want to live there, and the people who are stuck there will be the poor people who will suffer because now they have a law enforcement arm that's pulling its punches.
I actually
It's
have a
gonna
very
overcorrect.
different
Well, I think if you-
perspective, because I think that you look at what happened with the riots in Ferguson, I think that would deter people from wanting to live there. But now you think about a much more positive view going forward if these changes can be made.
right.
But are there lessons in this for Cleveland? I mean, we're also facing Justice Department findings, also have to negotiate a consent decree.
Oh,
Yeah, we're faced with a lot of the same boilerplate that
Right.
Ferguson got.
Yeah.
That,
Yeah.
if you go looking for this stuff, you're going to find it. Cleveland's had some very bad isolated incidents, and I think we're just going to end up going down this rabbit hole with the Justice Department. And the city is doing some resistance, and I think the city should. That's good. They should drive a hard bargain.
I think the city should know. I mean, you have a
know.
dead 12-year-old because, it appears as though there were some police practices that not even officers are saying were, the best practices
Right.
in terms of handling that case.
And there's clearly a need for better training and better communication. And so I think, the lessons of Ferguson can be applied to Cleveland, and whether you believe the changes will be substantive or not, I mean, at least there are lessons learned. There'll be a guideline for the cities to follow in terms of fair treatment and police accountability and transparency.
I mean, accountability and letting people know that they're going to be scrutinized, that has an effect on their behavior. But at the bottom line, you got to get people in there, whether it's in your top jobs or rank and file, that have integrity, that want to be good cops, good leaders. And I'm not so sure that in a lot of places that happens. I think that's one of the big problems are the people that are hired for some of these jobs, and I think communities have to do a better job. They have to realize how important it is. It's the same thing kind of with teachers. You got to realize how important it is to get people who are sincere into those jobs. I'm not saying the best and the brightest, but who want to do those jobs and want to do them well.
But and make the system work. I mean, in
Right.
Cleveland, one of the problems is the arbitration. And it's how do you deal with that?
Yeah, that
So
you
you
can't
have good
punish
people,
No, that's-
holding officers that go rogue accountable, but they hit the arbitration system.
But I do think that there is a more systemic issue here, as we've seen with some of these cases, hiring that happened without fully exploring a person's background, training that is clearly not sufficient, and also pay that is shockingly low. Timothy
I
Lohman, who
agree.
was the shooter of Gina
Tamir.
Rice, made very little money as a rookie police officer. One of the things you saw from the community in their recommendations to the city and the Justice Department as these negotiations on the consent decree start is that there be resources provided both by the city and the federal government. And I guess good luck getting it from the federal government is.
Or the city.
Or the city, yeah.
But no, I think that people recognize that that's
Yeah,
important.
definitely.
So,
But one other quick point, though, I do think that you are more likely to find these problems in in areas where, municipal budgets are strapped, people, there aren't a wealth of good jobs and that kind of thing, because it all kind of feeds.
Yeah, but that's like
Yeah.
everywhere.
Well, no, it's not everywhere, but it's a lot of places. for
Yeah.
sure.
Anyway, that's, will have to be the last word from our group. Thank you very much for watching. Please leave your thoughts about Ferguson and about the Cleveland police situation in the comments. We will pay attention to those. We do take that seriously, and we want to hear from you. Thank you.